The morning sun lit up the gardens of the Thompson estate, where hundreds of white flower arrangements lined the path to the altar. Ethan Thompson looked in the mirror and fixed his tie one last time. At 32, he had everything a man could want. He ran one of the biggest tech companies in the country and was about to marry Olivia Rothschild, the most beautiful woman in New York's high society. The guests are arriving. Jake, his best friend and best man, walked into the room. "You ready?" Ethan forced a smile, but something didn't feel right. Maybe it was just wedding jitters, but lately he'd been wondering if Olivia was really the one. Ever since he took over as CEO, she seemed more interested in getting her picture in magazines than building a life together. "I need some air." Ethan grabbed his car keys. "Just a quick drive to clear my head." Jake tried to stop him, but Ethan was already heading to his red Ferrari. The winding road leading to the mansion had always been his favorite place to think. The morning breeze carried the smell of the ocean. As he approached a sharp turn, a dog ran into the road. Ethan swerved to avoid it. The car spun out of control. The crash was violent. The last thing Ethan saw was the sky through the broken windshield. Sarah. Miller pushed her cleaning cart through the hallways of St. Luke's Hospital. At 28, she wasn't like the other cleaning staff. She always took time to talk to the patients, even the ones in comas. She believed everyone needed a friendly voice. The emergency team rushed past her with a new patient. Sarah moved her cart aside and watched them wheel in a handsome man in a tuxedo. Within hours, the hospital was swarming with reporters and photographers. The patient was Ethan Thompson, the billionaire who should have been getting married. Sarah watched as important people came and went. A beautiful woman in designer clothes showed up crying dramatically, but left after 15 minutes. When things quieted down at night, Sarah went in to clean his room. "Well, Mr. Thompson, you picked quite a day to end up here," she said softly, while wiping down the bedside table. "But don't worry, lots of people are pulling for you." She had no idea those simple words would change both their lives forever. Over the next few days, Sarah watched the parade of visitors. Olivia Rothschild, the fiancée, only came when photographers were around. She'd pose by the bed, fix her hair, and talk about wedding plans while cameras flashed. Then she'd check her phone and rush off to some important meeting. Sarah started using her breaks to visit Ethan at night. She brought books from the library and read to him. "They say people in comas can hear everything," she told him. "So, I thought you might like some company." While Sarah spent her nights reading to Ethan, his brother Alexander was making moves. He called an emergency board meeting at Thompson Technologies. With an old power of attorney, he started taking control of everything. "It's just until Ethan recovers," he told the shareholders, but his eyes said something else, especially when he had secret meetings with Michael Davis, Ethan's biggest rival. One night, Sarah overheard Olivia arguing with Alexander in the hallway. "We need to move faster," Olivia hissed. "People are asking questions about the wedding." "Be patient," Alexander shot back. "Soon we'll have control of everything and you'll get your share like we planned." Sarah's heart sank. She started telling Ethan everything she saw and heard, hoping somehow he'd understand the danger he was in. "Your brother's up to something," she whispered one night. "And your fiancée, she's not who you think she is. You need to wake up." She felt a tiny squeeze on her hand. The heart monitor beeped faster for a second. Sarah smiled, keeping this moment just between them. The doctors said it was just a reflex, but Sarah knew better. Every night she read him more stories. She told him about her life, her dreams, her fears. She didn't care that he was a billionaire. To her, he was just a man who needed someone to care about him, not his money. Alexander's visits got shorter and shorter. He always brought lawyers and papers. Olivia only showed up when magazine photographers were there. But Sarah stayed. Night after night, she sat with Ethan, talking, reading, hoping. The press lost interest after a while. The story of the billionaire in a coma wasn't news anymore. But in that quiet hospital room, something beautiful was growing. Not the flashy kind of love you see in movies, but something real, something true. Sarah knew it was crazy to fall for a man in a coma. He was rich, she was just a cleaning lady. He had a fiancée even if she was after his money, but Sarah couldn't help it. She fell in love with the man she talked to every night, the man who somehow seemed to hear her, to understand her. What she didn't know was that very soon, Ethan would wake up, and when he did, nothing would ever be the same. 2 months had passed since the accident. The autumn leaves were falling outside St. Luke's Hospital, and Sarah was getting ready for another night shift. She'd developed a routine with Ethan now. Every night at 10, she'd come to his room with a new book. But tonight was different. When Sarah walked in, she noticed his fingers moving slightly. She'd seen little signs before, but this was more than just a reflex. "Mr. Thompson," she whispered, pressing the call button for the nurse. "Can you hear me?" The doctors rushed in, and for the next hour, they ran tests. Sarah waited outside, her heart pounding. Dr. Martinez finally came out with a smile. "He's showing signs of waking up," he said. "The next 24 hours are crucial." Sarah couldn't sleep when she got home that morning. She kept thinking about Ethan, about all the nights she'd spent talking to him. What would he remember? Would he even want to know her once he woke up? Meanwhile, across town, Alexander Thompson was in his office at Thompson Technologies. He was meeting with Michael Davis, their biggest competitor. "The merger papers are almost ready," Michael said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Once we have control of Ethan's shares, the company will be ours." Alexander smiled, but his phone interrupted them. It was the hospital. His face went pale as he listened. "What do you mean he's waking up?" he snapped. "That's not possible." At her penthouse, Olivia was trying on wedding dresses for a magazine photo shoot. The tragic bride, they were calling her. She'd gotten 3 modeling contracts since Ethan's accident. Her phone rang. It was Alexander. "We have a problem," he said. "Get to the hospital, now." Sarah was back at work that night. The hallway, outside Ethan's room, was chaos. Doctors, family members, and reporters were everywhere. She pushed her cart past them, trying to stay invisible like always. Olivia arrived in a designer dress, camera crew in tow. "My darling," she cried, rushing to Ethan's bedside. "I've waited so long for this moment." Sarah watched from the doorway as Olivia posed for pictures. Alexander paced the room, whispering urgently with lawyers. Nobody noticed Ethan's eyes starting to open. Sarah saw it first. She'd spent so many nights watching his face, she knew every detail. His fingers twitched, then his eyelids fluttered. The room went silent. Everyone held their breath as Ethan Thompson opened his eyes for the first time in 2 months. "Water," he whispered. Olivia rushed forward with a glass, but her expensive bracelet got caught on the bedrail. While she struggled with it, Sarah quietly stepped in with a cup and straw. Ethan's eyes met hers as he took a sip. For a moment, the whole world disappeared. There was something in his look, recognition maybe, but how could that be? "Darling." Olivia pushed Sarah aside. "It's me, your fiancé. Oh, we've all been so worried." Ethan looked confused. Who are you?" The room went dead quiet. Olivia's perfect smile cracked a little. "What do you mean? I'm Olivia, your fiancé. We were supposed to get married the day of your accident." Ethan looked around the room, his eyes wide and lost. I don't remember." The doctors rushed everyone out except family. Sarah went back to her cleaning cart, her mind racing. Ethan had amnesia. He didn't remember Olivia or the wedding. Did that mean he didn't remember all their nights together either? All the stories she'd read him, all the secrets she'd shared. Through the next few days, the hospital was in chaos. Reporters camped outside, trying to get news about the billionaire who couldn't remember his own fiancée. Doctors came and went, running tests and asking questions. Sarah kept her distance, but she couldn't help watching. Ethan remembered some things. He knew he ran a company. He recognized his brother Alexander, though something seemed off about their interactions. But he had no memory of Olivia or their relationship. "It's probably temporary," the doctors said. "Memory loss after. Trauma is common. It might all come back or it might not." Olivia put on a brave face for the cameras, playing the part of the devoted fiancé. But Sarah overheard her angry phone calls in the hallway. "This ruins everything," she hissed to someone. "How am I supposed to marry him if he doesn't even know who I am?" Late one night, when things were quiet, Sarah went in to clean Ethan's room like always. She didn't expect him to be awake. "Hello," he said softly. Sarah jumped, nearly dropping her cleaning supplies. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, I can come back later." No, please stay. He studied her face. There's something familiar. About you. About your voice. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. I'm just part of the cleaning staff. I've been taking care of your room while you were sleeping. It's more than that. He closed his eyes. When I was in the coma, I could hear someone reading. To me, talking to me. Was that you? Sarah hesitated. What should she say? Would he think she was crazy? Would he be angry that a cleaning lady had spent so much time with him? Before she could answer, they heard voices in the hallway. Alexander and Michael Davis were coming, talking in loud whispers about board meetings and contracts. Hide, Ethan said suddenly. Please, I need to hear what they're saying, and they won't talk if they know someone's here. Without thinking, Sarah slipped into the bathroom. Through the door, she could hear everything. The shareholders are getting suspicious, Michael was saying. We need to move fast. Just give me 2 more days, Alexander replied. Memory loss or not, he's still my brother. I can convince him to sign. He'd better, Michael growled. We've invested too much to back out now. Sarah's hands were shaking. They were going to trick Ethan into signing something that would help them take over his company. Should she tell him what she knew about their plans? About Olivia's involvement? When the men left, she came out of the bathroom. Ethan was sitting up in bed, his face hard with anger. You've heard things like this before, haven't you? He asked. While I was in the coma. Sarah nodded slowly. Your brother and Ms. Rothschild, they've been planning something. I tried to tell you while you were sleeping. I told you everything I heard. I know, he said softly. I remember a voice, your voice, warning me, protecting me. He reached for her hand. Please, tell me everything. Sarah sat in the chair beside Ethan's bed and told him everything. She told him about Olivia's short visits, always with cameras, about Alexander's secret meetings, about all the whispered conversations she'd overheard during her night shifts. So my own brother and my fiancée. Ethan's voice was tight with anger. They've been planning to take everything while I was helpless. I'm sorry, Sarah said softly. I know it must be hard to hear. Ethan looked at her with tired eyes. Why did you stay? All those nights, reading to me, warning me. Why did you care? Sarah felt her cheeks get hot. Because it wasn't right, what they were doing. And because no one should be alone when they're hurting. Before Ethan could respond, they heard heels clicking down the hallway. Olivia was coming for her morning photo opportunity. You should go, Ethan said quickly. But please come back tonight, I need to know more. Sarah slipped out just as Olivia swept in, carrying shopping bags and followed by her usual photographer. Darling, I brought you some new pajamas. These hospital gowns are so dreary. Olivia's smile was perfect, practiced. The magazine wants to do a story about our love surviving this tragedy. Ethan watched her pose and preen. How had he never seen through her act before? I'm tired, he said. Maybe we could do this another time. But sweetheart, the photographer's already here. She perched on his bed, arranging herself carefully. Just a few pictures. I said no, his voice was firm. I'm not feeling well. Olivia's smile slipped for just a second. She waved the photographer away and leaned in close. Listen, darling, I know you're confused right now, but you have to trust me. We were so in love before the accident, it will all come back to you. Will it? Ethan met her eyes. Tell me something, Olivia. If you love me so much, why do you only visit when there are cameras? She stepped back like he'd slapped her. That's not fair. I have commitments, a career you built using my accident for publicity. Olivia's face went hard. You don't know what you're talking about. The doctor said your memory's confused. Maybe it's finally becoming clear. She stormed out, already on her phone. Within an hour, Alexander showed up with Dr. Roberts, a specialist in brain trauma. Your brother tells me you're having some paranoid thoughts, the doctor said, checking Ethan's vitals. That's not uncommon after a head injury. I'm not paranoid, Ethan said. I'm finally seeing the truth. Alexander stepped forward, all brotherly concern. Ethan, you're not thinking straight. The company needs you to sign some papers. Just routine things to keep everything running smoothly while you recover. What kind of papers? Nothing important, just transfer of voting rights? Temporary power of attorney? Ethan laughed without humor. You mean you want me to sign away? Control of my company. It's for your own good. Alexander's voice got harder. You're in no condition to make decisions. Get out. Ethan's hands were shaking. Both of you, get out. The doctor wrote something in his chart, probably noting his paranoid behavior, but Ethan didn't care. For the first time since waking up, he felt truly clear. That night, Sarah came back as promised. She brought him hospital records showing all of Olivia's brief visits, always during press hours. Security camera footage showing Alexander's late-night meetings with Michael Davis. How did you get all this? Ethan asked, amazed. I'm just the cleaning lady, Sarah smiled. Nobody notices me. I can go anywhere, see anything, and I have friends here. Good people who've watched what's been happening and want to help. Ethan took her hand. You're not just the cleaning lady. You're the only person in my life right now who's telling me the truth. Sarah's heart beat faster, but she pulled her hand away. Mr. Thompson. Ethan. Please. Ethan, you're vulnerable right now, confused. You shouldn't trust anyone too quickly. Including you? His eyes were intense, especially me. She stood up. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. She was right. The next morning, Alexander arrived with a team of lawyers. They had papers for Ethan to sign. The board is concerned, Alexander said smoothly. They need to know the company's in stable hands. So of course, Ethan's voice was pleasant. I'll just have my lawyer review these first. Your lawyer, Ethan, these are our company lawyers. Who work for you now? Ethan pressed the call button. I've contacted Patricia Chen. Remember her? The lawyer you fired last year because she asked too many questions. Alexander's face went white. You can't be serious. Oh, I am. And one more thing. Ethan smiled as hospital security arrived. I'm having you escorted out. No more late-night meetings. With Michael Davis in my room. How did you... You've been spying on me. Let's just say I have friends you never noticed. After they took Alexander away, Sarah came in to clean. She acted normal, like she hadn't helped gather the evidence that exposed his brother's plans. Ms. Chen will be here this afternoon, Ethan said casually. I think you should sit in on the meeting. Sarah nearly dropped her mop. Me? But I'm just... The woman who saved my company? The only person who cared enough to protect me? He held out his hand. Please, Sarah, I need someone I can trust. She looked at his hand, then at her cleaning cart, at her worn uniform and simple shoes, at the gap between his world and hers. Okay, she said finally, but I'm not promising anything. Just promise you'll keep telling me the truth. His smile was warm, real. That's all I need. Outside the room, Olivia watched through the window, her perfect face twisted with rage. She pulled out her phone. Michael, we have a problem. That cleaning woman knows everything, yes, everything. Something has to be done about her today. Patricia Chen arrived at the hospital exactly at 2 o'clock. She was a small woman with steel-rimmed glasses and a briefcase that looked like it weighed more than she did. Sarah tried to leave, but Ethan asked her to stay. So, Patricia said, looking through the papers Alexander had brought. Your brother's been busy while you were sleeping. How bad is it? Ethan asked. Bad. She pulled out more documents. He's transferred most of your voting shares to himself. He's close to a deal with Michael Davis that would basically give away your company for pennies, and... She paused, frowning. There's something strange about your accident. Sarah sat up straighter. What do you mean? Patricia pulled out a police report. The brake lines in your Ferrari were cut. The police ruled it an accident, but the investigator who made that ruling got a new job at one of Alexander's companies a week later. Ethan's face went pale. Are you saying my brother tried to kill me? I'm saying nothing about your accident was an accident. Sarah felt sick. All those nights she'd spent reading to Ethan, and his own brother had put him there, had wanted him dead. We need proof, Ethan said. Real proof, not just suspicions. I might know how to get it, Sarah said quietly. Both Ethan and Patricia turned to look at her. Michael Davis always meets Alexander in the hospital coffee shop. They think nobody notices them, but the barista is my friend. She's seen them pass papers back and forth, and she has access to the security cameras. Patricia smiled. "Ms. Miller, I think you and I need to have a talk with your friend." But before they could make plans, a nurse rushed in. "Ms. Miller, there's an emergency in the maintenance office. They need you right away." Sarah stood up. "I'll be right back." "Be careful," Ethan said. Something in his voice made her pause. Their eyes met, and 1,000 unspoken things passed between them. The maintenance office was in the basement. As Sarah walked down the dark hallway, she felt something was wrong. The emergency lights were off, her footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. "Hello?" she called out. "Jerry, Mark, anyone here?" A shadow moved behind her. Before she could turn, someone grabbed her arm. "You should have minded your own business," a man's voice growled. She recognized him, one of Michael Davis's security guards. Sarah fought back, just like her brothers had taught her. She stomped on his foot, twisted away and ran. But another man stepped out of the shadows ahead of her. Meanwhile, upstairs, Ethan was getting worried. "It's been too long," he told Patricia. "Something's wrong." Patricia checked her phone. "The maintenance office says they never called for her." Ethan hit the nurse's call button. When the nurse came in, he pulled out his IV. "I need to find her." "Mr. Thompson, you can't leave your bed." But he was already standing, shaky but determined. Patricia helped him into a robe. In the basement, Sarah was cornered. The two men were closing in. "Mr. Davis just wants to talk to you," one said with a cold smile. "About all those things you've been telling Mr. Thompson." "I bet she's got proof," the other one said. "Phone, maybe? Pictures?" Sarah backed up against the wall. Her phone was in her pocket, recording everything. If she could just keep it hidden, get the evidence to Patricia. Suddenly, the basement door burst open. "Sarah?" Ethan's voice echoed down the hallway. The men turned, surprised. Sarah took her chance. She ducked under their arms and ran toward Ethan's voice. She found him leaning against the wall, pale and breathing hard. Patricia was beside him, already dialing security. "Run!" Sarah grabbed his arm. "They're coming." They made it to the elevator just as the men rounded the corner. The doors closed just in time. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, still holding on to her. "You shouldn't have come down here," Sarah said. "You're not strong enough. You risked everything to protect me." He touched her face gently. "Did you think I wouldn't do the same for you?" The elevator doors opened onto a crowded hallway. Hospital security was everywhere, and Patricia was talking to the police. "I got it all on video." Sarah pulled out her phone. "Everything they said. About Michael Davis, about the evidence." Patricia took the phone with a triumphant smile. "This is exactly what we needed." But their victory was short-lived. Olivia came charging down the hallway, her face a mask of fury. "What is going on?" she demanded. "Why are there police here? Ethan, darling, you should be in bed." "Stop calling me darling." Ethan's voice was cold. "It's over, Olivia. We know everything." "Know what?" She laughed nervously. "Honey, you're confused. The doctors said what you paid them to say." Patricia stepped forward. "Just like the investigator who covered up the brake line evidence." Olivia's perfect mask cracked. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," Sarah held up her phone, "we can prove everything." "You!" Olivia lunged at Sarah, but security held her back. "This is all your fault. You're nothing, do you hear me? Nothing but a cleaning lady." "She's everything you're not," Ethan said quietly. "Honest, brave, real." Olivia screamed in rage as the police led her away. Down the hall, they could see more officers escorting Alexander out in handcuffs. "You okay?" Sarah asked Ethan, who was swaying slightly. "Never better." But his legs gave out, and she had to help him back to his room. Later that night, after all the excitement died down, Sarah came in with her usual book. "You don't have to do this anymore," Ethan said. "You're not just the cleaning lady now. Patricia wants to hire you as an investigator." "I know." Sarah sat in her usual chair. "But I like our routine unless—" "You want me to stop?" Ethan reached for her hand. "I want you to read to me forever." She blushed but didn't pull away this time. "Forever is a long time." "I hope so," he said softly. And as she opened the book and began to read, they both knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The news about Alexander and Olivia's arrest was everywhere. Billionaire's brother attempts murder. Society bride behind bars. Corporate conspiracy exposed by hospital hero. Sarah couldn't go anywhere without seeing the headlines. You should sue them, Rita, the cafeteria lady, told her during lunch. Break. Your picture's in all the papers. They're making money off your story. But Sarah didn't care about money or fame. She kept working her regular shifts, cleaning rooms, talking to patients. The only thing different was that now, when she visited Ethan at night, there were no more secrets between them. The doctors say I can leave next week, Ethan told her one evening. They were sharing a contraband pizza he'd convinced a nurse to bring in. That's wonderful. Sarah tried to sound happy, but her heart sank. Once he left the hospital, everything would change. He'd go back to his mansion, his fancy life. She'd still be here, cleaning floors. I want you to come with me, he said suddenly. Sarah nearly choked on her pizza. What? Not like that. He laughed, then got serious. Patricia's setting up a special team to investigate other companies like Michael Davis's, looking for corruption, fraud, people taking advantage of others. She wants you to lead it. Me, but I'm not a lawyer or an investigator. I'm just the woman who saved my life and my company. He took her hand. Sarah, you see things others miss. You care about people others ignore. That's worth more than any law degree. Before she could answer, Dr. Martinez came in for evening rounds. Sarah quickly grabbed her cleaning supplies, falling back into her old role. Remarkable recovery. The doctor said, checking Ethan's vitals. Though I'm concerned about your blood pressure, still a bit high. That's my fault, Sarah said without thinking. The pizza was my idea. Dr. Martinez looked between them and smiled knowingly. Just remember, Mr. Thompson still needs rest, even if his visitor is good for his heart in other ways. After the doctor left, they both burst out laughing, but there was something new in the air between them, something that made Sarah nervous. I should go, she said, standing up. You need your rest. Sarah. His voice stopped her at the door. About that job offer. Just think about it, okay? She nodded and left quickly, her mind spinning. In the hallway, she ran into James, the night security guard. Watch out, Cinderella, he teased. Your prince is getting out of here soon. Better get your glass slipper ready. Stop it, she swatted his arm. It's not like that, but wasn't it? Hadn't she fallen in love with Ethan during all those nights reading to him? And sometimes the way he looked at her. No, she couldn't think like that. Men like Ethan Thompson didn't end up with cleaning ladies. That only happened in fairy tales. The next morning, Sarah was surprised to see Patricia Chen waiting by the time clock. Walk with me, the lawyer said. She led Sarah to the hospital garden. I'm going to be direct. Ethan's board of directors is meeting today. They're voting on the new corporate structure, including my special investigations unit. I need your answer about the job. I don't know, Ms. Chen. I'm not qualified. You discovered a murder plot, exposed corporate fraud, and gathered evidence that will put some very powerful people in prison, all while working nights as a cleaning lady. Patricia smiled. I'd say you're overqualified. Sarah looked at her worn uniform, her practical shoes. It's not just about the job, is it? No, Patricia admitted. Ethan's falling in love with you. Probably already has. The board is concerned about the cleaning lady scandal, about his judgment. He had a head injury. They think he's not thinking clearly. Patricia's voice softened. If you take this job, prove yourself in the corporate world, it would help. Show them you're more than just the woman who took care of him when he was sick. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. So even if I love him back, I have to prove I'm worthy? No, Patricia squeezed her shoulder. You have to prove them wrong about what worthy means. Back inside, Sarah went about her duties with a heavy heart. She was covering for another cleaner today, working the day shift instead of her usual nights. As she pushed her cart past the executive wing, she heard angry voices from the hospital administrator's office. She's a liability, a man was saying. Do you know what the donors are saying? Our biggest benefactor falling for a cleaning lady. A cleaning lady who saved his life, another voice argued, after spending months alone with him while he was vulnerable. How do we know she didn't plan this? Get close to him when he couldn't. Resist? Sarah's hands shook as she gripped her cart. Is that what people thought? That she'd somehow taken advantage of Ethan? She was so upset, she didn't notice someone coming up behind her until a hand grabbed her arm. Sarah Miller? It was an elegantly dressed woman with perfectly styled grey hair. "I'm Margaret Thompson, Ethan's mother." Sarah's heart stopped. She'd heard about Mrs. Thompson, of course, the family matriarch who'd been in Europe during Ethan's coma, rushing back as soon as she heard about Alexander's arrest. "Mrs. Thompson, come with me." It wasn't a request. Margaret led her to a private waiting room and closed the door. "So," she said, studying Sarah with sharp eyes, "you're the woman who exposed my older son as a would-be murderer and saved my younger son's life. I just did what was right, did you?" Margaret's voice was cold. "Or did you see an opportunity? A rich, vulnerable man, all alone?" "No!" Sarah felt her fear turn to anger. "I talked to him because nobody else did. I read to him because he deserved to know someone cared. How so you love him?" It wasn't a question. Sarah lifted her chin. "Yes, but not because he's rich, because he's kind and brave. And he sees people for who they really are, not what they own or wear or—" She stopped as she realized Margaret Thompson was smiling. "Well," the older woman said softly, "perhaps my son's judgment isn't so impaired after all." Margaret Thompson's approval should have made things easier. Instead, it seemed to make everything more complicated. Suddenly, Sarah wasn't just the cleaning lady who'd helped Ethan. She was the woman who'd impressed Margaret Thompson, and everyone wanted to know why. "You have to come to dinner," Margaret insisted. "The family needs to see you in a different light." Sarah looked down at her uniform. "I don't have anything to wear to a Thompson family dinner." "Leave that to me." Margaret wrote down an address. "Go to this boutique tomorrow morning. They'll be expecting you." That night, during her regular visit with Ethan, Sarah was quieter than usual. "You met my mother," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because you're worried about something, and my mother tends to have that effect on people." He took her hand. "What did she say to you?" "She invited me to dinner at your house. And that's bad because—" Sarah pulled her hand away. "Because I don't belong in your world, Ethan. I don't know which fork to use or how to talk about stocks and bonds. I've never even been inside a mansion except a clean one, Sarah." His voice was soft but firm. "Look at me." She turned, and his eyes were so full of love it made her heart hurt. "My world?" He shook his head. "My world is full of people like Alexander and Olivia. People who smile while they stab you in the back. People who care more about money than loyalty. I don't want that world anymore." "What do you want?" "I want someone real. Someone who sees me, not my bank account. Someone who reads to me and brings me smuggled pizza and isn't afraid to tell me the truth." He reached for her hand again. "I want you." Before Sarah could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway. They heard shouting, then running feet. "He's gone," someone yelled. "Alexander Thompson escaped custody." Ethan tried to get up, but Sarah pushed him back. "Don't you dare, you're still not strong enough." Security swarmed the hospital. Police cars surrounded the building, but Alexander was nowhere to be found. He had help, Detective Morris told them later. "Someone paid off a guard. We're looking at the security footage now." Sarah felt cold. "The basement cameras, check the basement cameras." The detective looked surprised. "Why?" "Because that's where they tried to grab me before. It's the perfect escape route. Service tunnels connect all the hospital buildings." They rushed to the security office. Sure enough, the basement footage showed Alexander being led through the tunnels by a man Sarah recognized, the same security guard who'd attacked her. "He's not trying to escape," Ethan said suddenly. "He's trying to get to the executive offices. That's where all the evidence is being kept." But when they got to Patricia Chen's temporary office, they were too late. The safe was open and empty. "Everything's gone," Patricia said, her face pale. "All the evidence about the brake lines, the fake contracts, everything." "Not everything." Sarah pulled out her phone. "I still have the recording from the basement, and I sent copies of everything to my email just in case." Ethan stared at her. "You backed up the evidence?" "I grew up with 3 brothers who always blamed me for breaking things. I learned to keep proof." Patricia laughed with relief. "And this is why I want you on my team." They called Detective Morris, who put out an alert. But Alexander seemed to have vanished. He won't get far, Margaret Thompson said when they told her what happened. She'd arrived at the hospital as soon as she heard about the escape. I've already frozen all his accounts. He'll have hiding places, Ethan warned. Secret accounts we don't know about. Maybe not so secret, Sarah had been thinking. The night maintenance crew, they clean the executive offices after hours. They see things, hear things. Like which executives stay late making phone calls to offshore banks? Margaret raised an eyebrow. The cleaning staff knows about secret bank accounts. We know a lot of things. People talk like we're invisible. Rich people especially. Within an hour, Sarah had organized a meeting with the night cleaning crew. They remembered everything. Account numbers written on scraps of paper, late-night calls to banks in the Cayman Islands, even the names of Alexander's secret contacts. I can have those accounts frozen within the hour, Patricia said already. On her phone. He'll be desperate now, Detective Morris warned. No money, no escape route, that makes him dangerous. As if to prove his point, Sarah's phone rang. The number was blocked. Hello? You think you're so smart. Alexander's voice was cold. The clever little cleaning lady who ruins everything. What do you want? Come to the hospital roof, alone, or I start making calls about what really happened the night of Ethan's accident, about who helped cut those brake lines. Sarah's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Ask your friend Rita in the cafeteria. Ask her about the extra money she made that night, for keeping quiet about what she saw. The phone went dead. Sarah looked around the room, at Ethan, at Margaret, at the detective. Rita was her friend. She couldn't believe. He's lying, she said. He has to be. But deep down, she remembered things. How Rita had suddenly bought a new car right after Ethan's accident. How she'd acted nervous whenever Sarah talked about the investigation. What did he say? Ethan tried to get up again, but he was still too weak. Nothing, just threats. Sarah headed for the door. I need some air. Sarah, Ethan called after her. Don't do anything stupid. But she was already gone, heading for the stairs. She had to know the truth, had to hear it from Rita herself. What she didn't know was that someone had followed her. Someone who'd seen the fear in her eyes and knew exactly what Alexander Thompson was capable of. Margaret Thompson watched her future daughter-in-law walk into danger, then pulled out her phone. Security. This is Margaret Thompson. I need eyes. On the hospital roof. Now. The night air was cold on the hospital roof. Sarah's uniform wasn't made for this weather, but she barely noticed the chill. Her mind was racing with questions. Had Rita really helped Alexander? Had Sarah trusted the wrong people all along? I was wondering if you'd come. Alexander stepped out from behind an air conditioning unit. He looked different from the polished businessman she remembered. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair messy, his eyes wild. Where's Rita? Sarah asked. Oh, she's around. Alexander smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Probably counting her money. It's amazing what people will do for the right price. I don't believe you. No? He pulled out his phone. Let's call her, shall we? Rita, dear, tell Ms. Miller what you told me about the night of my brother's accident. Sarah heard Rita's voice, shaky and tearful. I'm sorry, Sarah. They offered me so much money. My daughter needed surgery, and our insurance wouldn't cover it. That's enough. Alexander hung up. See? Everyone has a price. Even your precious friends. Sarah felt sick. What do you want from me? The evidence, all of it. Your phone, your email passwords, everything. And then what? You'll just let me go? He laughed. You really are naive. No, my dear. You know too much. But I'll make it quick. A tragic accident. The grieving cleaning lady, devastated by betraying. Her friend jumps from the roof. Sarah backed away. You're crazy. I'm practical. My whole life I worked while Ethan got everything handed to him. The company, the praise, even our mother's love. And then you came along, a nobody, and ruined everything I'd planned. You tried to kill your own brother. I tried to take what should have been mine. He moved faster than she expected, grabbing her arm. And now you're going to help me finish what I started. Sarah fought back just like before in the basement. But this time Alexander was ready. He was stronger, more desperate. They struggled near the edge of the roof. Let her go. Margaret Thompson's voice cut through the night air like steel. Alexander spun around, pulling Sarah in front of him like a shield. Margaret stood by the roof access door, elegant as ever in her designer coat. "Mother, come to watch another of your children disappoint you." "No, Alexander, I came to stop you from making an even bigger mistake." "Mistake?" He laughed wildly. "My whole life has been one big mistake in your eyes. Nothing I did was ever good enough, but this time I win. This time you'll add killing an innocent woman to attempted murder." Margaret took a step forward. "Think, Alexander. Really think. What happens next? You kill Sarah, destroy the evidence. Then, what? You'll spend the rest of your life running. Is that what you want? Better than watching Ethan get everything again, even the girl, a cleaning lady. And you approve, don't you? I saw how you looked at her, like she's the daughter you always wanted." Sarah felt his grip loosen slightly. Just enough. She stomped hard on his foot and twisted away. Alexander grabbed for her, lost his balance. Sarah felt his hand clutch her uniform as he fell. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. She was falling with him, the ground spinning below. Then strong hands grabbed her arms, pulling her back. Margaret Thompson, with strength that belied. Her elegant appearance dragged Sarah to safety. Alexander caught himself on a ledge, 1 floor down. Within minutes, police and rescue workers had him secured. "Are you all right?" Margaret asked, holding Sarah's shaking hands. "Rita." Sarah could barely speak. "She helped him." "No, dear." Margaret smiled slightly. "That was Patricia on the phone, disguising her voice. We needed to keep Alexander talking while security got in position." Sarah stared at her. "You set him up?" "I raised 2 sons in the corporate world, my dear. I learned a few tricks." She straightened Sarah's uniform with motherly concern. "Now shall we go tell Ethan he can stop trying to climb out of his hospital bed? The security guards are having quite a time keeping him there." Sure enough, when they got back to Ethan's room, 2 guards were physically blocking him from leaving. "Sarah." He pushed past them the moment he saw her. "Are you okay? When Mother said Alexander was on the roof, I'm fine." She let him pull her close, breathing in the clean hospital smell of him. "Your mother saved me." "That's what mothers do," Margaret said simply. "We protect our children." She looked meaningfully at Sarah. "All our children." Detective Morris came in looking pleased. "Alexander Thompson is in custody, and this time he's not getting out. We found something interesting in his phone. Messages to Michael Davis about the break cutting, the fake contracts, everything. Seems your brother kept records of all his crimes." "Of course he did," Margaret sighed. "Alexander always did love to document his successes, even his criminal ones, apparently." Sarah suddenly felt very tired. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and drained. "You should rest," Ethan said, noticing her exhaustion. "I still have rooms to clean." "No, you don't." Margaret's tone brooked no argument. "I've spoken to the hospital administrator. You're on paid leave, effective immediately. But consider it a vacation. You'll need it." Margaret smiled. "Planning a wedding takes a lot of energy." Sarah and Ethan both stared at her. "Mother," Ethan protested. "I haven't even—" "Oh, please." Margaret waved her hand. "I've seen how you look at each other. I'm not getting any younger, and I would like grandchildren someday." Sarah felt her face get hot. "Mrs. Thompson." "Margaret, dear, or mother if you prefer." She headed for the door. "Now about that family dinner, I think we should wait until all this excitement dies down. Say next week. That should give us time to get you properly dressed." After she left, Sarah and Ethan looked at each other. "I'm sorry about my mother," he said. "She can be a bit overwhelming. I was going to say pushy, but she means well." He took her hand. "And she's not wrong. About how I look at you, I mean." Sarah's heart skipped. "Ethan, I know it's fast. I know we come from different worlds. I know there are a million reasons why this shouldn't work." He squeezed her hand. "But I love you. Not because you saved my life or exposed Alexander's plot. Because you're you. Because you read to me and bring me contraband pizza and aren't afraid to tell me the truth. Even if I don't know which fork to use at fancy dinners. We'll learn together." He pulled her closer. "So what do you say? Want to scandalize New York society by marrying a patient?" Sarah pretended to think about it. "Well, your mother did already approve." Is that a yes? She kissed him in answer. And in that quiet hospital room, with the night sky dark beyond the windows, two people from very different worlds found they weren't so different after all. The next week passed in a blur. Sarah took her mother-in-law-to-be's advice and accepted the paid leave, though she still visited the hospital every day. Not to clean, but to help Ethan with his physical therapy. "You don't have to push me so hard," he complained as she made him do another lap around the ward. "Yes, I do," she supported him as he walked. "The doctor says you need to build your strength back up. The doctor's not as pretty as you. Stop trying to flirt your way out of exercise." They were both laughing when Patricia Chen arrived with a stack of papers. "Good news," she said. "The board approved everything. The Special Investigations Unit is officially up and running. And Sarah, your position as director is confirmed." Sarah nearly dropped Ethan. "Director? I thought I was just going to be part of the team. You're the one who uncovered the biggest corporate fraud case this year. The board figures you've earned it." Patricia smiled. "Plus, it helps that Margaret Thompson personally recommended you." Ethan squeezed Sarah's hand. "See? Even the board knows how amazing you are, but not everyone was as supportive." That afternoon, Sarah overheard two nurses talking in the break room. Can you believe it? From cleaning lady to corporate director, just because she's sleeping with the boss. "I heard she planned the whole thing. Got close to him while he was helpless." Sarah walked away, her chest tight. She'd known there would be talk, but it still hurt. "Don't let them bother you," Rita said, appearing beside her. The cafeteria worker had been extra nice since the roof incident, feeling guilty about Sarah thinking she'd betrayed her. "They're just jealous. What if they're right?" Sarah stopped walking. "What if I am in over my head? I don't know anything about running a corporate department." "You know about people," Rita said firmly. "You know how to spot lies and find truth. The rest? That's what assistance and training programs are for." Speaking of training programs, Margaret had arranged for Sarah to start corporate etiquette classes. 3 times a week, she sat with Mrs. Winters, a stern woman who taught her everything from wine selection to international business customs. "No, no, no," Mrs. Winters would say. "The fish fork goes on the outside." But it wasn't all bad. Some lessons were actually useful, like how to handle difficult conversations diplomatically. When someone makes a snide comment about your background, Mrs. Winters taught her, simply smile and say how interesting that you're concerned about that. Then change the subject. It makes them look petty without you losing dignity. Ethan got stronger every day. Soon he was walking without help, then doing short workouts in the physical therapy room. The doctors said he could go home in a few days. "Move in with me," he said one evening as they shared another smuggled pizza. Sarah nearly choked. "What? Well, we are getting married. Unless you've changed your mind?" "Of course not. But your house is so big. I wouldn't know what to do in a place like that." "Neither. Do I honestly?" He laughed at her surprised look. "What? I grew up there, but it never felt like home. Too formal, too perfect. I was thinking maybe we could find our own place. Something that could be ours, not just mine." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. He understood her fears without her having to explain them. The next day, Margaret brought over wedding magazines and fabric samples. "The society papers are already speculating about dates," she said, spreading everything out on Ethan's hospital bed. "We should make an announcement soon, Mother," Ethan warned. "We haven't even set a date yet." "Well, you need to. The plaza books up months in advance." "The plaza?" Sarah felt faint. "I was thinking maybe a small ceremony." Margaret looked horrified. "Small? Dear, you're marrying one of New York's most eligible bachelors. The wedding has to be an event." "No, it doesn't." Ethan's voice was firm. "It has to make Sarah happy. That's all that matters." Margaret opened her mouth to argue, then stopped, looked at Sarah's overwhelmed face, remembered perhaps what it was like to marry into the Thompson family herself. "You're right," she said finally. "I'm sorry, dear. This is your wedding. What kind of ceremony would you like?" Sarah thought about it. "Something simple but elegant, not too many people. Maybe in the hospital garden?" "The hospital garden?" Margaret blinked. "This is where we fell in love," Ethan said softly. "Where Sarah read to me, where she saved me in more ways than one. Besides," Sarah added, "all my friends are here. Rita, the night shift nurses, the maintenance crew." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, really smiled. A garden wedding in early summer. Small, but perfect. We can set up tents in case of rain, bring in flowers to match the garden. She was already making notes. And Sarah, dear, what would you think about having 2 ceremonies? The small one here, just for family and close friends. Then later, a larger reception. For the business world? That way you can have your perfect day and we can still satisfy social obligations. Sarah looked at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. That actually sounds perfect. Wonderful! Margaret stood up. I'll call my event planner. Don't worry about a thing, dear. Between the 2 of us, we'll create exactly the wedding you want. After she left, Ethan pulled Sarah close. See? Even my mother is on Team Sarah now. I still can't believe this is real. She touched his face gently. Sometimes I think I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream. If it is, then I'm dreaming too. He kissed her softly. And I don't want to wake up. But their peaceful moment was interrupted by Sarah's phone. It was Patricia. Turn on the news, she said without greeting. Channel 4. Sarah grabbed the remote. The screen showed Olivia out on bail giving an interview. It's all lies, she was saying, tears in her eyes. I knew nothing about Alexander's plans. I was a victim too, and now that poor man is being manipulated by that woman who took advantage of him when he was vulnerable. Sarah turned off the TV, her hands shaking. She's trying to get ahead of the story, Patricia said. Paint herself as the victim before her trial. Will people believe her? Sarah asked. Some will. Some people love a scandal more than they love the truth. Patricia's voice hardened. But we have evidence, real evidence. She's just making noise. After hanging up, Sarah looked at Ethan. Maybe we should wait until after the trial. No. His voice was firm. We're not letting Olivia or anyone else control our lives. We're getting married in the garden in early summer, surrounded by people who love us. And anyone who doesn't like it can go to hell. Sarah had to laugh. Your mother would be horrified to hear you talk like that. My mother would agree with me. She just wouldn't say hell. She'd say something like they can retire to a less favorable location. They were both laughing when the nurse came in for evening rounds. Looking at them, she smiled. You 2 are good for each other, she said. Don't let anyone tell you different. And in that moment, Sarah knew they'd be okay. There would be challenges, gossip, people who didn't understand. But they had each other, and that was all that mattered. The day Ethan was released from the hospital felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another. Sarah helped him pack up his room, which had become their special place over the past months. Don't forget this, she said, pulling a worn copy of The Little Prince from the bedside drawer. It was the first book she'd ever read to him. I think we should keep it, he said, for our kids someday. Sarah blushed. They hadn't talked much about children, but the idea made her heart warm. The whole hospital staff came to say goodbye. Rita brought cookies, the nurses had cards, and even Dr. Martinez got emotional. You 2 give an old doctor hope, he said, hugging them both. Don't be strangers. We'll be back in 2 months for the wedding, Sarah reminded him. They decided on a June ceremony in the hospital garden. Margaret had thrown herself into the planning, but true to her word, she consulted Sarah about everything. The transition wasn't easy. Sarah started her new job as director of the Special Investigations Unit, and some days she felt completely lost. I don't know what I'm doing, she confessed to Patricia one afternoon after a particularly difficult meeting. None of us did at first, Patricia assured her, but you have good instincts. Trust them. Those instincts were tested when Olivia's trial began. She'd hired the best lawyers money could buy, and they were brutal. Ms. Miller, Olivia's attorney, questioned her on the stand. Isn't it true that you spent many hours alone with Mr. Thompson while he was in a vulnerable state? Yes, Sarah answered firmly. I read to him and talked to him because no one else would. And during these private moments, you developed romantic feelings for him. Objection. Patricia stood up. Relevance goes to motive, Your Honor. The prosecution claims my client manipulated Mr. Thompson when, in fact, I loved him before he ever woke up, Sarah interrupted. The courtroom went silent. I loved him when he was just a patient who needed someone to care. I loved him when he had nothing to give me, except his company. Can Ms. Rothschild say the same? Olivia's perfect mask cracked. She stood up, screaming, You stole him from me. He was my ticket to the top, and you ruined everything." The judge banged his gavel, but the damage was done. Olivia's outburst revealed her true nature to everyone. That evening, Sarah and Ethan had dinner with Margaret. "The newspapers are calling it the society scandal of the year," Margaret said, pouring wine. "My son's ex-fiancée revealed as a gold digger. His new love a modern-day Cinderella." "Mother," Ethan warned. "Oh, let them talk," Sarah surprised them both by saying. "In a few months, they'll find something new to gossip about." Margaret raised her glass. "That's my girl." The weeks flew by. Sarah's investigation unit uncovered 2 more corporate fraud cases. She was good at her job. Her years of being invisible as a cleaning lady had taught her to spot lies and secrets. Ethan went back to running his company, but things were different now. He started a program to help hospital workers get advanced education. The first scholarship went to Rita's daughter. "See," he told the board, "sometimes the best talent comes from unexpected places." The wedding preparations were almost complete. The garden was in full bloom, and Margaret had worked miracles with the space. Not too fancy, she'd promised Sarah. Just beautiful. The morning of the ceremony, Sarah stood in her old break room, now converted into a bridal suite. Rita and the nurses helped her get ready. "Something borrowed." Rita handed her a delicate bracelet. "It was my grandmother's." "Something blue," Nurse Chen added, pinning a forget-me-not to Sarah's bouquet. "And something new." Margaret entered with a small box. Inside was a simple pearl necklace. "Every Thompson bride has worn these. Now they're yours." Sarah touched the pearls gently. "But what about something old, right here?" Dr. Martinez appeared with a familiar book, their copy of The Little Prince. "To remind you how your story began." The garden was perfect. Lights twinkled in the trees, and white flowers lined the paths. Only their closest friends and family were there, just as they'd wanted. When Sarah walked down the aisle, she saw tears in Ethan's eyes. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she reached him. The ceremony was simple but moving. They wrote their own vows, speaking from the heart about love, trust, and second chances. "I knew I loved you before I ever saw your face," Ethan said. "I fell in love with your voice, your kindness, your heart." "You saw me when I was invisible," Sarah replied. "You loved me for exactly who I am." After they were pronounced husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers. Rita cried, Margaret beamed, and Dr. Martinez kept saying, "I knew it," to anyone who would listen. The reception was in the hospital cafeteria, transformed by Margaret's team into an elegant dining room, but it still felt like home. To the happy couple, Patricia raised her glass, who remind us that true love doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. "And to second chances," Margaret added. "May we all be brave enough to take them when they come." Later, as they danced under the stars in the garden, Sarah looked up at her husband. "Happy?" he asked. "Perfect," she replied. "But what about the big society reception next week? Are you sure you want to face all those people?" "Sarah," he pulled her closer, "I would face anything with you. Besides, wait until they see my beautiful, brilliant wife run circles around them." "At corporate events," she laughed. "Your mother's etiquette lessons might finally pay off. Speaking of mother, she wanted me to tell you. She's giving us her cottage in the Berkshires for our honeymoon. Said it's private, peaceful, and," he grinned, "has an excellent library. For reading to each other every night," he promised, "for the rest of our lives." As they danced in the garden where their story began, Sarah thought about everything that had brought them here. A car accident, a coma, a cleaning lady who cared enough to read to a sleeping man. Some people called it a fairy tale. But Sarah knew better. It wasn't about Cinderella or Prince Charming. It was about 2 people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose love over appearances, truth over pretense. And that was better than any fairy tale. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the hospital garden, remembering the day that changed her life. The roses were blooming, just like they had been on her wedding day. "I thought I'd find you here," Ethan said, coming up behind her. "Feeling nostalgic?" "A little." She leaned back against him. "Can you believe it's been a year?" So much had happened in that year. Olivia had been convicted of conspiracy and fraud. She was serving 5 years in a minimum security prison. Alexander got 20 years for attempted murder and corporate fraud. The last time Margaret visited him, he'd finally broken down and apologized for everything. Too little, too late, Margaret had said afterward, but at least it's a start. Sarah's investigation unit had become one of the most respected departments in the company. They'd uncovered dozens of fraud cases and helped countless people who'd been cheated by corrupt executives. "You know what today is, besides our anniversary?" Ethan asked, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "What?" "The board just approved the Thompson Foundation's new scholarship program, full college funding for hospital support staff and their children." He handed her the envelope. "And guess who's going to be the first recipient?" Sarah opened it and gasped. Inside was an acceptance letter from New York University for Rita's daughter. She got in? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Rita's going to be so happy," already told her. "She's been crying in the cafeteria for an hour." Ethan grinned. Dr. Martinez had to give her a sedative. They walked through the garden, past the spot where they'd said their vows. The hospital had changed too. The new CEO, Ethan had stepped down to focus on charitable work, had implemented many of Sarah's suggestions about improving conditions for support staff. "Remember our first society event?" Sarah asked. "When that woman asked if I was there to collect the coats?" Ethan laughed. "And you said, 'No, I'm here to collect evidence of tax fraud.'" The look on her face. It hadn't all been easy. There were still people who looked down on Sarah, who whispered about the cleaning lady who married the billionaire. But she'd learned to handle them with grace, and the occasional well-timed corporate investigation. "Mrs. Thompson," a young nurse hurried up to them. "Your mother-in-law's on the phone. She says it's urgent." Sarah took the call, then turned to Ethan with a huge smile. She got it. Mother's Foundation just bought the old Miller factory. It was a project they'd been working on for months. The factory where Sarah's father had worked before it closed down, leaving hundreds of families struggling. The Thompson Foundation was turning it into a community center with job training programs and childcare facilities. "We're naming it after your father," Margaret had insisted. "The Daniel Miller Center for Community Growth." They headed inside where Rita was still emotional about her daughter's scholarship. "I never thought." She wiped her eyes. "All those years of struggling, working double shifts, and now my baby's going to college. And she won't be the last," Ethan promised. "This is just the beginning." In Sarah's office, she still couldn't believe she had an office. There was a shelf with special books. The Little Prince, of course, all the books she'd read to Ethan during those long nights, and a new edition, a leather-bound journal. "What's that?" Ethan asked, noticing it. "I've been writing our story," Sarah admitted. "Not for publication or anything. Just for us. For our children someday." Ethan took her hand, his thumb brushing over her stomach. "Speaking of children," Sarah's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I was going to tell you tonight. You've been glowing for days." He pulled her close. "And you asked Rita to make those weird pickle sandwiches you normally hate. Are you happy?" "Happy?" He kissed her deeply. "Sarah, you've given me everything. Love, truth, a future I never knew I wanted. And now a family of our own, I'm beyond happy." They went up to the roof. Their roof now, after all the drama that had happened there. The city stretched out before them, beautiful and full of possibilities. "I have something for you too," Ethan said. He handed her a small box. Inside was a key. "What's this for?" "I bought your old apartment building, the whole thing. We're turning it into affordable housing for hospital workers." He smiled at her surprised face. "No one should have to choose between helping others and supporting their family." Sarah felt tears in her eyes again. Damn pregnancy hormones. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. Always will." As they stood there watching the sunset, Sarah thought about fairy tales, about happy endings and new beginnings, about a cleaning lady who dared to read to a sleeping man, and a billionaire who woke up to find his true love wasn't in the society. Pages, after all. Down in the garden, the evening shift was starting. A young cleaner was pushing her cart, probably dreaming of a better life. Sarah made a mental note to talk to her tomorrow, tell her about the scholarship program, because that's what life was really about. Not just finding your own happiness, but helping others find theirs too. Ready to go home, Ethan asked. Sarah took one last look at the hospital, remembering everything that had happened here, the pain and joy, the fear and triumph, the love that grew in the quiet hours of the night. Yes, she said, let's go home. They walked out together, past the garden where they'd married, past the rooms where they'd fallen in love, past the people who'd become their family, and somewhere in a drawer in Sarah's office, a worn copy of The Little Prince waited to be read again. Maybe to a child this time, a child who would learn that what is essential is truly invisible to the eye. But that's another story for another night. The end.